Well, parts of Sandton, Alexandra and Hyde Park in the north of Johannesburg will be without water for over 12 hours tomorrow. That's to allow for the repairing of a leaking valve. It comes as water shifting is to be implemented in Gauteng in order to prevent taps from running dry. Let's talk further about this now with Outa's Water Community Action Network Executive Manager Ferrial Adam. Ferrial, a very good evening to you. Good to have your time. So this leaking valve, how important is it? How critical is it that this be repaired right now?
I think it's really important in that valve itself is not allowing reservoirs to fill up. And so without fixing it, you're going to have a longer term problem. So I think that, yes, it has to be fixed on the immediate. I don't think it is part of the water shifting, as you've mentioned, as yet. It's part of basic infrastructure falling apart.
And indeed, we were not suggesting that the leaking valve is part of the water shifting intervention as instructed by the Minister, Newzroom, but the two issues, of course, work hand in hand when you consider that one of the main problems why South Africa has a water shortage, especially in a province like Gauteng and more specifically in Johannesburg, is that water leaks are at a level where actually the problem appears to have gone out of hand to some extent.
Absolutely. It's completely out of hand. In a minister's response to Parliament earlier this year, he mentioned some of the high levels, the high amounts of water that's being wasted. We're losing about, it costs the country about 2 to 3 billion rand a year because of the leaks that we have in our country. A province, a city, a municipality like Mfuleni loses 71% of their clean water. City of Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, they're all sitting in the 30s or upper 30s in terms of how much water they're losing.
And that puts into context, am I right, for people who may question why this work has to be done now when something as serious as quote-unquote water shifting is being put on the table, but it's absolutely essential.
It is essential, but I think also we have to come to terms with the fact that our water infrastructure is really falling apart. And we are going to see more and more of this kind of thing happening across the board, and I'm not even sure for how long this will happen. Our infrastructure has been ignored, and there's been a lack of maintenance for too long. So I think that what we're seeing now is going to become the new norm.
And, I'm looking at a piece from last year where the finance MMC, Dada Morero, said at the time in the budget that water losses had peaked in June of 2022 in Johannesburg with 25% of water lost through leaks. I wonder then if the interventions being implemented in Johannesburg, including maintenance and repair work, are being done in the most optimal way. Does the strategy to arrest this problem make sense?
It doesn't seem like there's actually a good enough strategy to deal with the problem, because there's a few things. Is that we have some areas with absolute no water. You're talking about from 3 days to 3 months. You have polluted water in terms of some areas. And so, I think that leaks just make sense to do them as quickly as possible, because we can deal with that. We can have more water in the system, but that's not happening.
And some of this infrastructure may very well have to be replaced. And the concern has been from some experts that, A, we're not moving, or the city and the other water entities aren't moving with enough speed, but also that it'll be costly. Is there enough in the kitty to get this done?
So that's the challenge. Is on the one hand, yes, it will be costly, but the reason it's costly is because it's been left for so long. And so we can't afford not to do anything. And in terms of costly, the national government does take money away from municipalities if they do not spend it in the time that they need to spend it. We're saying that perhaps national government needs to pay the contractors directly and bypass the municipalities, because I think that that's where you're having the blockages. That's where you're having the vast amount of corruption happening. And like, for example, Hammanskraal, where Rooiwal should have been fixed, it has not been fixed because money's gone wasted, and the Temba water treatment plant. So let's bypass the municipalities. Let's try and avoid the corruption and let the national department pay directly. So don't take the money away. We need to fix the water infrastructure. Let's do it in a much better, more sustained manner.
Let's move on then to the issue of the so-called water shifting. Made headlines last week. Minister Newzroom basically issuing a directive that Rand Water implement that. Much of the reaction from South Africans has been to say, let's call it what it is. These are water cuts. Is water shifting basically a smart way to dress up a crisis?
So there's two things. One is what I've been calling that, let's be honest, and you saying, your viewers are right, is that there are water cuts, and I'm calling it water shedding. Because there are vast amounts of areas and residential areas and suburbs in Gauteng and in particularly city of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni and Tshwane, where from about 7, 8 o'clock at night, even 9 o'clock, there's no water in their taps until 6 o'clock in the morning. That is water shedding. And they're not being honest about it. They're not saying that this is what we're doing. So they're saying we're throttling the supply so that we can fill up the reservoirs. So that's the challenge. And in terms of water shifting, it's a much bigger issue where you're actually taking the reservoirs that do have water and then directing it to the areas that don't have enough water. So, for example, the minister's talking about this as a temporary measure. Now, we have to hold them accountable because they said water tanks would also be a temporary measure. And if you look at many parts of the country, your insert on KZN, water tanks are becoming the norm. So the idea of water shifting is supposed to have a line that is not too busy and redirect it specifically to the permit system and to allow that system to recover. So it's not going to be water shifting across the board. It's in a particular system that they want to try and create alleviate some of the pressures on that system. The challenge, though, with water shifting is that it assumes we have, before with the amount of the demand of water, we could have a 48-hour kind of hold in a reservoir before the water would be depleted and people use it up. Right now, that's not happening. So I'm not so sure how well water shifting would work.
So there's a question about its sustainability, shall we say, in perhaps the medium to longer term. You were mentioning areas, for example, where people say overnight they go without water. Some of the reports we've seen, especially in the last month, people in the south of Joburg, for instance, saying some communities have been without tap water for 7 to 14 days at a time. How quickly could this become a norm in a place such as Johannesburg and perhaps even the rest of the country?
I'm worried that it almost is the norm. I mean, if you think about the water challenges, it's been a year now when we first had the first cuts and water cuts in the city of Johannesburg area, specifically Melville, Fordsburg, and going south of Johannesburg, where a lot of those areas and suburbs have already had those water cuts. So it's been a year. It's not happening for the last month or 2 months. And so my concern is that it's quickly becoming the new norm and the new reality. And I do think the minister, on the one hand, I think is really good in that he came and he talked to people and he had a meeting and he allowed for action plans to be put in place. The city of Joburg, the mayor, I mean, they just having blame games and they're not doing the same. So we need the political heads to be on the same page. And for as long as we don't have that, we're not going to fix this problem that's bigger than we are. And we cannot, as the city of Joburg, we cannot allow this to get any worse.
And just that, the tug of war that we're now emerging between the Water Minister, Sinza Mchunu, and the Johannesburg Minister, Kabelo Komanda, who should be taking the lead ultimately in trying to get the metro out of this point?
Well, the city of Joburg should have at least, as the mayor, it's a municipal issue. It's water supply at a municipal level. The mayor definitely needed to have shown more leadership on this issue, and he did not. I think that the minister did show leadership, especially because at that point, all fingers were pointing to Rand Water. Now, Rand Water has other challenges in that we also need to talk about who decides how much water Rand Water is allowed to abstract. So they're saying that they are given a water use license, and that license is for a certain amount of water. When last was that license renewed? Because if it was 2010, for example, you are talking about almost a decade where you haven't reviewed that license, and obviously people have migrated into Johannesburg. There are more developments, there are more housing developments. So surely we need to look at that license again and understand how to use that. But in addition to that, Temakile, I think as South Africans, and we said this about electricity, we are wasteful. We are flushing clean drinking water down the toilet. Where are the plans to reuse and recycle water, because that is where we're going to go, whether South Africans like it or not. We have to, and we will be going in that direction.
Ferrial Adam, good to speak to you. Outa's Water Community Action Network Executive Manager. Thank you for your time tonight.